So the question we have to ask is, why do people feel so much poorer in America? They've been growing at a massive 3% GDP increase for years now, by far the highest in the world. They should be happy. They should have voted in Joe Biden or the Democrats to continue their amazing work of 3%. Yet we still see that the Fed has been cutting rates. Why would you need to cut rates if you have full employment? If the GDP is bursting 3% a year, the stock market is record after record, everything is amazing. You wouldn't cut rates. You'd in fact increase rates to cool things down. But what have they done? They've cut it. Why? And the reason obviously is because they know there is no real growth. It's all fake. It's all lies. And we're going to prove it by a quant, right? A quantitative analyst, Siegfried Spitrit, something like that. So go check out his article. He basically says this. This is beautiful. US GDP 2008, 14 trillion. 2024, 29 trillion. Up 98%. Okay. M2 money supply though. M2 is the amount of money in cash and in bank vaults. Basically, it's the money that goes around in circulation and printed by the Fed as well. So it was 7.5 trillion in 2008, but in 2024, it is a whopping 21.2 trillion because of all the printing they did during COVID, where they printed 80% of all dollars in circulation. 80% was printed in 15 months. That's how much they printed. So we now have a ton of money. That is 189%. So really, what is inflation? It's too much money chasing too few goods, right? So we have now double the amount of money, well, triple the amount of money and double the amount of goods. So go figure that out. That means people are poorer because there's way too much money chasing way too few goods. Now they get away with this because they use the CPI. I've always said it, it's a fake inflation statistic. They call it 2%. And what happens is this, think about it like this. When they tell you a GDP stat, they go to real GDP. They do not use nominal GDP because they want to be fair. What's real GDP? Real GDP is the GDP with inflation taken out. So if, for instance, the economy grew by 5%, but inflation was 2%, they will say the GDP, real GDP, only increased 3%, right? We removed the inflation from the GDP statistic to give you a fair statistic. Look how good we are. Yeah, that's if you use your fake GDP lie. But if we're using the real one, which as we see here, it's double as high. So in our example, it would be GDP has increased 5%, but inflation really has increased 10%. So therefore your real GDP would be minus 5%. And that is what's been going on. Every single year, people have been getting poorer. Real GDP has gone down. Now, this is not so great because the reason is a lot of this money has gone to the rich that don't spend it and therefore doesn't cause proper inflation in the system, right? They just save it. So they become richer on paper, but they don't use it in the economy, which doesn't bid up prices, which doesn't mean the inflation actually occurs, right? So that, it's in between these two, right? We shouldn't go this far, but I am saying this. It is definitely much higher than what they are. The GDP has significantly gone down with people, certainly GDP per capita, and people are getting poorer every year because the GDP may be going up, but they're printing far more money than they do, and that normally goes to the rich, and that's why the rich have been getting much, much richer. It is now actually at a record in the US. So in the US, let me get this right. The bottom 40% do 20% of the consumption. The top 20% do 40% of the consumption. That is, on record, the worst ever. That's like Victorian times, right? The bottom 40%, it's not even bottom 40%, it's half the economy essentially, do virtually nothing of the spending, and the top 20% do virtually all of it. This is how bad it is. So that is why they voted in Trump. They are hoping, the poor are hoping that he can do something to generate wealth without printing it, but he will do the same thing because that's all they got. They got the money printer. They can't actually create. There's no innovation. There hasn't been any real innovation in years, 20 years. So that's all they got.